Utah County, on behalf of MAG, we're glad that you're able to come down to JPAC. My name's Robert Allen. I am standing in for Lenise Davenport, and who is the chair of this committee, and Michelle Carroll, our executive director. Both are unfortunately under the weather today. They're listening in to make sure I do a good job. So give me 4 stars on Google afterwards if you don't mind. But we'd like to welcome you to Utah County, and we're glad that you made the drive down. We're excited to be the host of JPAC this year. JPAC is such an important thing that we do it creates a wonderful forum for us to discuss transportation across the state and how we can work together to not only create the unified transportation plan, but to improve the lives of our citizens here in the state. So again, welcome and thank you for coming here. The first agenda item is just an introductions. We understand that there are a few new faces to JPAC this year, and so if we don't mind, we just kind of go around the table and then around the room. If you wouldn't mind telling us who you are, what agency you're with, and that will help a lot of us put names to faces. So again, like I said, I'm Bob Allen. I'm a senior planner with MAG, and I'm here standing in for Lenise Davenport as the chair today.
I'll start this.
I'm Jeff Gilbert. I'm the cash metropolitan planning.
Kathleen Alder, Mayor of Providence, but chair of the Cash Metropolitan Planning Organization.
Mr. with Cash Metropolitan Planning Organization Connect.
Carla Mayor, Mayor.
Mayor Basin. And you got. Everybody did see people. Right in the word, I got to check.
Maria Jones Cox, I'm Boston Regional Council.
Please, Elder, no. Jeff Bezos, UDOT.
Gil Almquist, Washington County.
That's over, it's not Transit Authority.
Are there any members online that would, if you don't mind introducing yourselves?
Gil Almquist, Washington County Commissioner, 5 County, Southwest area.
Neil
I'm
Berube,
trying
Mayor,
to, sorry,
North Ogden.
we're having some technical.
Uh,
Let's see, how about this? When I share my screen, it goes really small. There you go.
Yeah, so if you're online, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Gil Almquist, Washington County, 5 County area, Southwest.
Neil
Shepherd,
Berube,
Clearfield City
Yeah, I
Mayor.
can hardly read the names. I can't.
Neil Berube, Mayor, North Ogden.
Well, while we're working on these technical difficulties, maybe we'll have those in the room introduce themselves really quick, those in the back.
They can't be heard.
Oh, they can't be heard. Okay, never mind. I guess not. Good that, yeah, welcome. Thank you for being here. If somebody wants to just volunteer and start introducing yourselves, we'd appreciate it. We're having a little bit of a hard time seeing names on the screen.
Shepherd, Clearfield City Mayor, representing WFRC.
Raylene Blocker, Commissioner from Morgan County.
Oh.
Commissioner Gil Washington.
Yeah, are we able to hear them?
I'm working on it.
Neil Berube, Mayor, North
Apparently
Ogden.
not.
I can hear you.
Allison Stroud, Sandy City Council.
Okay, let's see if sorry, I'm just trying to. There, that's easier to see. Okay, here's.
Great, go. Commissioner Alquist, if you want to introduce yourself.
Commissioner Gil Almquist, Washington County, 5 County area, Southwest.
All right, maybe we'll have to do that. Back to where it was, so we could see. So it looks like we have Commissioner Alquist, Ross Romero, Allison Stroud, Andrew, I'm assuming that's Andrew Grouper, I believe. Andy Ferrucci, Commissioner Lee Perry, Commissioner Raylene Blocker, Ivan Marrero, Jay Fox with TA, Jeff Silvestrini, excuse me if I got that wrong. Julie Bjornstead, Kelly Lund, and then can you scroll down just a little bit more? Mayor Don Ramsey, Michelle Carroll, Miranda Jones, Neil, sorry, I don't know your last name, Neil, Nicole Bordeaux, some meeting note takers, Ross Romero, Ryan Levitt, Samantha Thesilorst, excuse me if I got that wrong, and Shep. That's a good name. Anyways, we welcome you. Thank you for bearing with us through some technical difficulties. Thank you for being here. The second item on the agenda is approval of the December 5th meeting minutes. If you are logged in, if you go to your appointment for this meeting, you can access the agenda there, all the presentations and the minutes and so forth are attached there. That's probably the easiest way to see all the information, but looking for an approval of December 25th, 2024 meeting minutes. They are part of your packet.
Gil Alquist move to approve.
Second,
So that, who was that made the motion?
Gil Alquist.
Okay, and the second was?
It was me, Carlton Christensen.
Thank you. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. Moving on to the next agenda item 3A, we have Trustee Christensen is going to talk about the 2025 direction for transit. I'm going to pass you this while we bring up that presentation.
And I'll just apologize in advance. I'm going to have to depart a little bit early today. I'm judging the social science finalist and Sterling Scholar, so I'll disappoint about 12 really bright kids when we don't choose them. So anyway, I think are we ready?
Yep, we'll
Okay.
just scroll through for you. If that's
Oh, okay, sure. We can, why don't we go to the next slide then? Sorry. As we look at for the first time in recent history for UTA, we're adding some service in about a month from now in April, which is a significant step forward for us, both from a labor availability standpoint and also, more importantly, the opportunity to service some areas that we've not done. But just as we look at 2024, would note that we recently completed a study with a number of you who are study partners about the economic value of transit, and in particular, looking at what the value is for the non-rider. And our study, which is the same group that does the economic portion for the Unified Transportation Plan, found that for every dollar invested in transit, there's a $5.11 return to our economy. Just some highlights for 2024. We kicked off the construction of the Mid-Valley Express. It's a BRT in the center of Salt Lake County. We also were able to secure in December the federal grant associated with that project. For the first time in our history, we actually have a 10-year capital plan. It's not a novel idea, but it was something missing in our long-range planning. We also have, in addition to that adoption of that plan, which will help us and guide us as we look at service going forward, and also in conjunction with the regional transportation plan, we have a 5-year service plan that we've update every 2 years. And as I mentioned before, This 5-year service plan calls for 9 million miles of additional service in our system, and with some of that taking place next month. As part of the project that UDOT is leading in the strategic double tracking of Front Runner, one of the significant milestones was hitting an 80% occupancy at peak times, and that was not only achieved for those like our colleague Jeff Acerson, who rides it regularly, can attest at peak time. It's probably a lot more than that, if not approaching 100%. And so that the work that UDOT is doing in cooperation with us probably can't happen fast enough. We also adopted or entered into a contract with Stadler Rail for the potential of up to 80 vehicles. We placed the order for the first 20. We're hoping to, within the next year or two, place an order for another 20 that will replace our oldest light rail vehicle fleet. We're excited not only to have Stadler as a partner there, but again, additional investment in a Utah company. And then, while not glamorous, we had a significant amount of Build America bonds. Those of you who were associated back coming out of the Great Recession, it was a very common vehicle. It had a federal subsidy associated with it, and that subsidy has slowly been cut. And there is some question, and there was a lot of potential vulnerability to UTA, up to about $130 million if we didn't refinance those bonds. And that trigger by Congress, when they cut that subsidy initially, allowed us to refinance those bonds. And so that's a significant piece. In the last 6 years, we've restructured to the betterment of a little over $1.5 billion of our bonds. Next slide, please. And then just note that we hit, additionally, we hit a number of ridership goals. 1 million riders on our OGX system. We hit a 30-year historical high for our van pool program. That's often goes looked past, but we have currently about 490 vans in our system, and that works quite well for a lot of employers and a lot of employees there, and that continues to grow at a pretty brisk pace. Carrying skiers on a day like today, we work to do that. And just to give you a sense of the stress that can sometimes be put on us, during the Warriors over the Wasatch Air Show at Hill Air Force Base, it turns out, not by any great planning, but we not only had the Arts Festival going in downtown Salt Lake, but there was a George Strait concert up at the University of Utah. So in that weekend, we carried a little over 57,000 passengers. Certainly took a lot. If we go to the next slide, I just want to point out a year-over-year increase in our transit service. We're starting to see even our average rider is lowering a little bit. Higher ed makes up about a fourth of our ridership. And so our rider continues to get younger. And as you look at our service, and if you can go to the next slide, as we compare those modes to what is often referred to in 2019 or pre-pandemic levels, our bus is nearly at our 2019 levels, and the other modes are quickly approaching that. And so really, for us going forward, we'll mostly look to a year-over-year comparison. If I could go to the next slide. Just note some of the top 10 projects going on, and what you'll see in our capital thing. While we are working on MVX, we're working on the environmental and planning side and design side for the South Davis Salt Lake connector. And of course, the work that we're doing cooperatively with UDOT. A lot of the capital that we do right now is to maintain and repair our existing system. Some of those aspects of that system are approaching 25 years old, and those require a constant amount of investment. Probably half of our capital goes to that replacement. Next slide, please. This identifies, as you look at buses, you can't look at buses too lightly in the sense that, our friends at Connect could attest to this. You know, your bus is running from probably the high $600,000-$700,000. And if you're into an electric bus, you're clearly into $1 million. So any additional buses that you add to your fleet are significant. We've started to replace a lot of our paratransit vehicles, and then a number of grade crossings, as well as bus stop improvements. Just some highlights. Next slide, please. Let's talk about where we're going in 2025, and we're excited. And if Jeff, you want to speak to this at all, you're welcome to. We're adding some on-demand service in West Provo. This is our first probably significant local service that we've added since UVX. This has worked well in Davis, Tooele, and Salt Lake counties as a type of a service, and will serve not only the airport, but some points beyond the zone that will allow passengers to connect and to get to most places where they need to connect to within our system. That will launch on the April 13th on our change day.
Just one point on that.
Yeah, please, Jeff.
The zone is highlighted there in yellow, but it will provide connections to the Orem front runner station, which is outside of the zone, and also to the Provo front runner station, and then the Provo Rec Center. Those are technically outside of that highlighted zone, but you can connect and make a ride to each of those locations. So.
Next slide, please. Thanks, Jeff. This outlines our capital plan, and mostly what I want to show here, aside from the fact that here's where we see ourselves going in the next 5 years. We don't plan in our capital planning for discretionary grants. We hope that they'll come, but we don't plan our budget around them. So as you look at later years, and you look at either the grants or even state funding, those numbers drop. We're optimistic and hopeful that we can achieve those grants or get those funding, but we stay within the constraints of the funds that we absolutely control. Just as a reminder, though, about half of that goes toward the preservation and maintenance of our current system. Next slide, please. These are just some large projects that are in the next few years, and all of these are significant. We continue to replace our bus fleet, and then our largest expenditure obviously will be in our light rail vehicle replacement. I'll just touch on a couple of projects if we can go to the next slide. Just as a reminder, our Mid-Valley or BRT project will connect in from our Murray Central Station, go through the Slick campus in Taylorsville, and then continue on to West Valley City. It will go past a number of state buildings there on 2700 West, including UDOT. Next slide. Just to note, this year has been a lot of utility work to get ready for that. All the agreements are fundamentally in place. The contractor's a little bit ahead of schedule, which has been a good thing. We're optimistic about when it might be able to start actual revenue service, but we're seeing two big factors that come into that. One is staffing, and then also the availability of the buses. Next slide, please. In December, the Federal Transit Administration came and awarded the full funding grant agreement for MVX. That was our last big fiscal piece, and it also allows us to go full forward with the construction of the project. Next slide. This is just an overview of the bus transfer station there on the Slick campus. The only downside to this being nearly completed is all the students are wondering, so when is the service actually coming? And so that obviously it's not quite ready yet, but it will serve that campus well, and the community college has a lot of future plans for the densification of that campus. Next slide. That just gives you a sense of those canopies. They're similar to what you see on UVX and the permanency of that system. Next slide. We are working in cooperation with UDOT, as well as and working under UDOT's direction, and with the Salt Lake City on the extension of the S line through the Sugar House area. Currently, it's slated to go to Highland Drive. We're actually looking to go a little past Highland Drive and going through some design discussions and cost. We're hopeful if that goes forward, we'll have a good idea in the next month or so, but construction would most likely commence shortly after that. Next slide. This 5600 West Bus project connects into the Red Line station. I think Mayor Burton occasionally is interested in the outcome of this project. It currently is slated to come into Salt Lake City. We're working with UDOT on that. This is important for a lot of reasons. One, it creates a 15-minute frequency system on the west side of Salt Lake County. It's also essential for the next phase of Mountain View Corridor in this section of Salt Lake County to proceed. That was part of the environmental document that UDOT had, and so we're working with that. We have a Lono bus grant for some natural gas vehicles. We're working through the FTA on that. There's you may have noticed that there's a few things going on in Washington, and so predictability isn't currently one of those, but we're in line for those buses to be manufactured, and we're optimistic this system will move forward. Next slide, please. This just gives you, this is probably a sexy slide for the engineers in the room, but this is the replacement of the substation on our system. It not only gives us higher, you don't think about this often, but if you have a full train going to a football game or a concert, the train draws more power. And what we find with these high load trains, that our substations need actually more power at them to be able to operate those trains. We're one of the larger users of power by Rocky Mountain Power, and that often gets looked past. So replacing this equipment's not an insignificant thing, and will improve the reliability of our system. Just a note on, gives you a sense of vehicles. We do a lot of the restoration on both our light rail and our commuter rail, and have the equipment to redo the trucks or the undersides of these vehicles, and it saves UTA a lot of money by doing so. Next slide. These often cause inconveniences, but if you've ever taken one of our crossings versus, say, a Union Pacific crossing, you will notice a significant difference in how smooth those are. It's important for us, both in the operation of our system, and also for the general public, traveling public, to replace those. We generally will do them as embedded track, and in fact, we're replacing ones that weren't embedded because at the end of the day, they wear longer, but it causes a longer inconvenience until we can do the work. Next slide. And this is just a sample as we look to bus stop improvements going forward, both in making them accessible and attractive to the communities where they reside. Next slide. This I just add, when the pedestrian bridge was done as part of the Tiger project in Lehigh. Unfortunately, we had a lot of rain the following year, and it took a toll on the footings on that facility. We've gone back in cooperation with the contractor and those involved and put a little bit more money in, did some redesign, and that bridge is back fully in operation and solved that problem. And then last is just if you have any questions. I know I went through that quite quickly, but I also know you have a lot on your schedule.
If
Yeah,
I can just
Jeff?
say one more thing on this, Southwest Provo / Orem on-demand service that will start in April. There will be, all the vans that will be a part of that service will be wheelchair accessible. So it really completes that opportunity for anyone that wants to participate in that.
And we do find both as we improve bus stops, as we add vans to this, it's amazing how the ridership of those in a wheelchair pick up significantly, and especially in how they utilize the system. That investment's always well returned. Any other questions? Great. Thank you for your partnership on it.
Thank you, trustee. Is there no more comments or questions? Then we'll move on to our next agenda item, advanced air mobility, Paul Dameron and Matthew Mass. How about you?
All right, I'd like to thank the JPAC members and acting chair for this opportunity to present on some exciting things that we're doing at UDOT Aeronautics here in the state. So my name's Paul Dameron. I work for the Division of Aeronautics out of UDOT. I've been with UDOT for over 13 years, did a lot of geospatial development down in the Region 4 Richfield area, and then moved up into aeronautics, which is an exciting division to work for. It does keep me on my toes and moving forward in a fun way. I'm not sure if a lot of you know of what we do in aeronautics, but we have mechanics that work on aircraft. We have aircraft that'll fly agents of the state, the governor, lieutenant governor around the state to participate in things that they need to get to quickly. It gets them home at night. We do a lot of aircraft registration. We also do capital improvement programs for all of our airports. And so it's fun. If you're ever in the Salt Lake area and you want to come check out the aircraft in our hangar, we'd be happy to have you and show you around. But today, what I'd like to do, I'm the Advanced Air Mobility Program Manager. What I'd like to do is talk about what Advanced Air Mobility is and how we've moved forward and progressed very quickly with Advanced Air Mobility through the state. This picture is obviously a hypothetical drawing of what a vertiport would look like. A vertiport is a new term that they're talking about when it comes to these new aircraft that I'll be talking about today. Imagine a heliport transitioned into something a little more user-friendly for the public. Most of you may not know, but we don't have a public use heliport in the state of Utah right now. They're all private. A lot of them deal with medical use. And so through this advanced air mobility platform that we're developing, we will be trying to transition with the guidance through the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, to transition the helipads and heliports into vertiports. So today I want to talk about, so how we've gotten to where we're at today. And I'm going to go through some bulleted lists. Sorry, there's some really good information on this, so I'm just going to kind of try and read through it fairly quickly so that if there's any questions at the end. But we've really been doing advanced air mobility at some level since 2014, 2017. when we started introducing drone operations in the work that we do at UDOT. A lot of that work that we did back then would be measuring stockpiles, gathering aerial imagery, putting it into a geographic information system for designers to utilize the data, supporting a lot of the survey information that our surveyors are out gathering, transitioned into doing some inspections on our roads, transitioned into doing some payment condition research. Our structures department uses drones to support structures and trying to find what the structures look like, if they're still good. There's been a lot of really good momentum through the process of using drones. So we transitioned from the drones into advanced air mobility about 2021. And so we initially started a study to help us identify what implementations of advanced air mobility could happen in the state. And that would include existing assets, like I talked about, the helipads, heliports, and what other assets may be needed. This is a ever-changing list. We're identifying, working with the FAA, working with industry to understand what these assets are and how we can help improve them to make sure that we're able to bring in this new era of aviation. So advanced air mobility really is a concept that is taking away the combustion engine from an aircraft and bringing electric to it. And so it's very economically friendly. Emissions, I've got some statistics that I'll share with you a little later, but imagine going from place to place on the Wasatch Front in Utah County on an aircraft that's economically friendly for us, kind of like an Uber is, and get you to places fairly quickly, fly over congested areas. We do a really good job at moving people. That's what our job is at UDOT. And we look at the sky as also an opportunity to move people around. A lot of stuff still needs to happen. Obviously, there's not any corridors in the sky that you can see. Where are these going to fly? We have to work with the FAA. We do not, as a state, manage the airspace. The FAA does. And so we're going to have to work closely with them to help them understand what type of operations we're going to need in the state to help support moving people around. And so that study helped us identify a lot of that. And also reviewed funding mechanisms for infrastructure. The infrastructure is going to be critical to help support, and we have to figure out how we can fund this. In 2022, we did some working group studies on current laws to identify potential statutory changes that may need to facilitate the advancement of advanced air mobility. We've had a lot of really great support with our legislators. Leif is going to be speaking a little later today about some of the work that he's been doing this year. He's great to work with. All the staff at UDOT has been great to work with. When we talk about advanced air mobility, it either goes over someone's head. If you're an aviator, you understand what's going on, or you may look at it and say, what the heck is UDOT doing trying to help support this type of stuff? The reason is it's coming to the states. And we want Utah to be one of the first to adopt these types of transportation solutions. And so working through and with our legislators has helped us gain the momentum we need. We defined what advanced air mobility is. It's simply using electric aircraft, either a conventional takeoff and landing or a vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, to move people and goods around the state. So we define that is in legislation here in the state. And then Zipline begins working here in the state of Utah. Zipline's pretty unique. They're no longer working in the state of Utah right now, but when they came back in 2022, we were able to work with them. It's an aircraft, a fixed wing aircraft about the size I am, and it catapults off of a slingshot and delivers medication with IHC. Their primary contractor was with IHC. And so they would work in the South or the West Jordan area to work with IHC to identify where they could land some of these parachuted boxes with medication in it. They started working with GNC Vitamins. They then started working with Crumble Cookie and Walmart. And so they did quite a bit of operations in that area. They were able to, and the reason they're not working here in the state of Utah anymore is because they were able to check off everything they needed to advance their operations to their second platform, which is a drone, and then lowers the package instead of letting it drop out of the bottom of this aircraft with a parachute. And so what they've been able to do is work with the FAA on a number of things. One was being certified to work beyond visual line of sight. If you're a drone operator or know someone that is a drone operator, it's a big no-no to operate without a visual observer or allow your drone to go beyond your visual line of sight. And so Zipline was able to get the waivers they needed from the FAA. They then were able to develop their operational boundaries from a 3-mile buffer around their operations to 11 to 14 nautical miles. Huge in the world of drones, autonomous drones. Then they were able to get approval with their acoustic detect and avoid system that they built that was on the aircraft. Their system allows them to fly, and if they can sense anything in the air, it will pre-program another flight path to get to where they need to go. Basically, it would go actually into a holding pattern until that what they were able to identify was gone, and then was able to get back into their flight path. And then the last thing is they were able to demonstrate that they could operate this drone remotely away in another state and got approval from the FAA to do that. So there was a lot of things that Utah was able to do to support them to make their operations advance. And so we were happy for that partnership. Go ahead and go next. In 2023, we looked at this, the new advanced air mobility aircraft and said, well, they don't really operate under or look like the traditional aircraft. They're really something different. So how are we going to or require them to register in the state of Utah? Because we do have a very robust aircraft registration program. So we identified to require some different rules for registration for the commercial advanced air mobility aircraft. We defined what vertiports were. I've already talked about that. UDOT will oversee the responsibilities of those vertiports. So just so you know, industry is not going to come in and start throwing these things out, developing these without the oversight from UDOT. We have addressed preemption of local ordinances related to business licenses. We are well aware that the FAA does manage a lot and they control a lot. And so we don't want to get in trouble with the feds. We work with them constantly. The prohibit of a city from having an agreement to grant an exclusive use for a vertiport owner was something we wanted to make sure that we were allowing competitive opportunities for businesses to move into the state of Utah. We really don't know what this landscape is still going to look like because there's not vertiports being built right now. And so we wanted to make sure that we have some of these things on the books so that we can address them and then identify moving forward. And then DroneUp begins to operate in 2023. DroneUp worked with Walmart in 2 locations, one in Harriman and one in Linden. And their operational boundary, I think, was visual line of sight. They did not get waivers to work beyond visual line of sight. So it was between that 2 to 3 mile nautical miles that they were able to operate in. They too are no longer working in the state. They were able to identify key operational opportunities here in the state. And then both companies have actually started operating in Texas, where there's a huge consortium of other drone operators and manned aircraft operators that are working with the FAA to help support regulations on the federal level. We are trying to see if we can bring them back into Utah and how we can be a part of that work that they're doing in Texas. 2024, I think, was a pretty big year. We did a lot of stuff. We had comments. We developed a drone registration rule. We had some comments that were provided, and we drafted that registration rule, which was difficult to do because it's something new. Companies weren't really interested in being required to do something like that, but other states are jumping on board, and so we really need to know how many of these types of commercial drones are operating in the state right now. And we can't do that without the support either through documenting it ourselves or trying to work with the FAA to get that data. And it's been hard to get that information from the FAA. Country of origin drone definitions. We did some banning of different country of origins, kind of followed suit with what the feds were doing. Airspace lease laws. When we start looking at deciding how we're going to move into the air and operate, we will work with the FAA to understand what those airspace lease laws look like. What type of leasing can municipalities, landowners do above their property? That's kind of what this is talking about. Land use protection for vertiports. There are land use protection laws for airports. We felt it very critical to account for the vertiports as well. Imagine developing right next to the end of a runway. The FAA won't let you do it because there's safety zones that are at the end of the runways. And so how these aircraft are going to operate in and out of these vertiports is critical to the businesses, homeowners around that area too. So we do have land use protection laws as well. We were able to, through Carlos's and his office support, was able to get a test site budget drafted. And we're excited to continue moving forward with that. This test site is going to allow us to work with internal other state or agencies to operate and advance their operations with drone operations, as well as advanced air mobility. We want companies to come to us to say, hey, look, we love Utah. We understand that the density altitude as you're flying around is a little different in the state. We need to see how that functions or what our aircraft do within that type of altitude. And so we are going to start advertising that, hey, our state's open for business. Why don't you come and start testing your aircraft here? And then Project Alta was developed in May of 2024. Project Alta is a group effort with 47G, the Utah's Airspace and Defense Association, Inland Port, UDOT, and GOEO. And we continue to work on almost a daily basis with those groups to advance what we're doing here. And go to the next one. The studies we're doing, I only have a few more slides. So the studies that we are doing this year or finishing from last year was a technology integration study that allowed us to look at the traffic management system that the state could purchase to help us understand what our drone operators are doing. We're a very big operator for the state, UDOT is. And so we need to understand where they're at in a technology sense. Public outreach and education, we identified what are the steps we need to take for that. The sandbox, we got some additional support on how to set up a sandbox, that test site for drones and advanced air mobility, and then weather reporting. Weather with aircraft is critical. We have a really good roadway weather information system that gives us a lot of information on our roads, but we need really kind of what's that 400 feet and below look like, and we're not really getting that type of weather. And so micro weather is critical to understand when through aviation. And then we just finished our economic impact study or analysis. That report will be on our website next week. But some information we gathered out of it was, and some of you may have been interviewed through the consultant that was doing that. So I appreciate everybody that supported us in that. But if we were to start advancing or developing advanced air mobility in the state of Utah and it operation, they're saying that 11,000 new jobs would be created in the state of Utah and 8 billion in business activity, and then another 1.8 billion in additional tax revenue. And that's just for the operations. We're also looking for working with our Project Alta team to identify manufacturing. Utah's got 20% of the airspace and defense businesses in the state, and manufacturing is critical to these aircraft, and we think that Utah is a good place for it. There are already manufacturers that are working with these companies that are developing these aircraft, and so there's other groups through Project Alta that are looking through or looking at how can we bring those companies to Utah. And so in our report, there's additional information about the economics of having manufacturers in the state. Back in 2023, we were asked to develop working groups. Senator Harper worked with us and said, we'd like you to create working groups that are a little more user friendly, not so big, not so large. We had, I think 60 people in a working group prior to this, and it was just hard to get information out of everybody. So I took the approach of saying, well, let's look at first 4 different working groups. And so the electric vertical takeoff and landing OEMs, I've got a working group that we meet quarterly. Air traffic, it's important to us. We're working with Hill Air Force Base and also Salt Lake air traffic controllers to identify some of the needs we are going to run into when it comes to air traffic. Planning and local municipalities. Some of your local planners are involved in this working group, and I appreciate them. And we've been able to have really great conversations about this. I think, and it has actually rolled into some legislation that passed this year. And drone operators. Obviously there's not aircraft to move people and cargo to the size of 1,000 pounds of cargo. So these drone operators are the key at understanding how advanced air mobility is going to first start in the state of Utah and how we can progress to those larger aircraft. And so drone operators. The next step, I've already developed another working group. We haven't met yet, but advanced air mobility operations, we need to start looking at operators. Not all of the manufacturers that are developing these aircraft are going to be the operators. There's companies that are already purchasing these aircraft and going to be the operators. And so I want to talk to them as a group and say, what do we need to do to look at operations for the state of Utah? And so some of the 3 things that came from those first 4 working groups were community outreach. They all said community outreach is a critical thing. Additional assets in the state of Utah, and then local municipality ordinances. They need some guidance. They need some help. And so I talked a lot about this Project Alta with 47G and GOEO Inland Port, the test site. The Advanced Air Mobility Collaborative. This is something pretty interesting to us. We were one of the first 8 founding members of a state DOT ran collaborative. We first met in Virginia, had a great discussion, and has grown ever since. And right now we're at 36 participating state DOTs and Division of Aeronautics directors or offices that want to harmonize policies at a state level, figure out what the approach and roles for each state are, sustainable funding and funding sources, and then leverage and enhance current aviation infrastructure. So there is a disconnect with industry and the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration. They don't really look at states as leading in advanced air mobility, but us states really look at it and say, well, there's a lot of things that are on the ground that are going to need to be looked at when it comes to advanced air mobility. How can states position themselves to help support industry and the FAA? And so that's what this multi-state collaborative is going to do. We actually have the opportunity to host this meeting next week, Monday and Tuesday. We've got about 50 to 60 participants that'll be here in the state of Utah from all over the country, and then also selected industry that's going to help support drive conversations. And those industries are going to be regional air carriers, large air carriers. I've got Delta, Boeing, American Airlines all participating. The manufacturers of these advanced air mobility aircraft are going to be present, and then operators. And so it's just that's exactly where we're headed in advanced air mobility right now is how are we going to operate these? And so, and then we've got an MOU with Jump Aero. It's a medical support aircraft they want to know where in the state of Utah, if they were to operate, do they have the best reach? Their aircraft fits one individual. They walk into it and it launches vertically, and then it'll pivot and fly like a traditional aircraft, and it'll get anywhere 30 nautical miles in 8 minutes. I mean, it zips to the area, it'll land, it'll provide either a first responder or a paramedic that can then help assess the scene while EMTs are on their way. And so it's critical to get, and the reason they wanted to keep it at 8 minutes is because those critical physical failures that someone may have, heart attacks, strokes. After 8 minutes is when the, you're less common to survive something like that. And so they wanted to make sure they could get in 8 minutes, where can we get? And it's about 30 nautical miles. And so we're looking at, with them and some other partners in the state, where could we position these aircraft to help support their operations and the public, working with Department of Public Safety on that. So, and then the Electric Aviation Subcommittee in 2023, Senate Bill 125 addressed electrification for infrastructure for transportation. And so they've set up subcommittees, and aviation is one of them. And we have got, I think I'll end on this, because I don't want to take up a bunch of time. I could talk all day about advanced air mobility, but what I do want to share, I'll share the slides with you. There's some videos about the aircraft, different types, drones, cargo, heavy lift cargo, and stuff that you guys can look at. I'm sure the committee attached to the agenda. So, but what I want to talk about is the electrification. So we were able to acquire $2 million for electrification at airports. We're working right now trying to figure out how we can maximize the $2 million that the governor was able to put in his budget. Just this week, we actually had an opportunity to have one of these aircraft, a conventional takeoff and landing aircraft, fly throughout the state. They first came in on Sunday, landed at Salt Lake. They landed previously in St. George and in Delta to do some charging, and then they flew up to Salt Lake, charged at our hangar, and then we had an event in Salt Lake at the Atlantic fixed based operator, and then they flew it down to Provo. We had another event there, and we've had each of these events. We've had 100+ people attend. And then the next day, then they flew it up to Heber. We had an event in Heber. Then they flew it to Logan, Ogden, and then back to Salt Lake that day. And then from Salt Lake to Vernal the next day. And then I do know that they flew yesterday to Moab and another location. But what we were trying to do was demonstrate a connectivity between communities and our airports utilizing this type of aircraft. And so I don't know if you've seen the news the last couple of days, but I'm pretty sure it's been everywhere. If you haven't and you don't look at the news a lot, maybe give it a search. There's a company called Beta Technologies. They have worked with 47G, the Utah Aerospace and Defense Association, to bring that aircraft here to the state and do these demonstrations. It was amazing to see. Great company, very family friendly. They were willing to let people check, walk up, touch the aircraft, see what it is, and then demonstrated taking off. Very quiet. Let me share some statistics with you. Actually, go to the next slide real quick. Let me see if I'm there. Yeah. So this is their electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. As you can see, kind of above the wing, there's like a little structure. That's the actual rotor. But this same the structure of this aircraft is identical to the one that was here in the state. And so this aircraft flew around. It's got a demonstration range of about 300 nautical miles, a charge time with the right type of connection to the power. It'll charge in 1 hour. Cargo capacity is 200 cubic feet inside there. Passengers 5 + 1 up by the pilot. It's IFR rated, so in all weather types. So it's like a traditional aircraft. You can fly it within, it's got the instruments that it can fly in any weather. The eVTOL, this one here, has got 40% hourly reduction in hourly operating costs compared to a Bell 406. So a helicopter that holds the same amount of people. And then 67% on the conventional takeoff and landing aircraft that would reduce an hourly operating cost up to that 67%. It's got $28 per hour energy cost savings versus a 311 hour cost for a helicopter. 84% less emissions, obviously with electric aircraft. And then 18%, and then that was the vertical takeoff. The conventional takeoff is $18 an hour per energy cost savings, versus a $347 an hour for a Cessna, that'll fit the same amount of people. And then it's a 75% less emissions on, compared to that Cessna. And so it's the way of the future. We're moving towards it. What we're trying to do is figure out how the state can position itself. And so through the legislation and the work that we've done, we've been able to get where we are. I appreciate everything that the state has done for us in allowing us to do this. One other thing was Senate Bill 96. I'm going to go ahead and let Leif and his team talk about Senate Bill 96, but we're excited about that as well. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. If not, you can find me after.
You mentioned what cities and counties go on here and other places. What is it you want? Well, how can we help?
So how you can help is, one, we'd love to have conversations with you to help figure out some of the ordinances. How can we make sure that you're ready and positioned to adopt it? Did you say you're with West Jordan?
We're ready.
We actually have a meeting later today with Paul.
Yes, you do.
And so
We're ready.
And so it initiates that conversation. Hey, what can we do to help you guys, help us figure out what are the next steps? So we've got 46 operating public use airports out there. We're going to need to help support one of the target dates for this type of operation is the Olympics. And so we're going to need to figure out where vertiports are going to need to be placed. How are those vertiports going to be electrified? What type of surveillance needs to be there? What kind of security needs to be there? So there's a lot. So if you have space and want these types of operations happening in your communities, talk to us. We're happy to paint this picture and share with you what you need to do to position yourself. We've had Layton City is ready to go with the vertiport. We've got positions at our airports that are ready to go. Salt Lake International knows it's going to be a hub to all of this. And so we're working with them to identify locations on their airfield. And so, yeah. So if you are ready to talk about this, we're happy to have those conversations.
Does the operator fly in the aircraft or is the operator outside the aircraft?
So this is they are manned. So
Yeah.
the operator there will be a pilot on board. There is one manufacturer that is developing a aircraft like this that is fully autonomous. The FAA is not providing any type of certifications for them yet, though.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
No more questions from the group. Can I ask somebody online potentially to maybe make a comment or ask a question so that we can confirm that we can hear you?
Bob, this is Dawn Ramsey. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great.
Excellent. Well, if there are no further questions, we'll move on to the next agenda item, legislative session recap. Leif Elder and Miranda Jones Cox. Are you going to present from there?
Yeah, if that's okay, we can come up front if
That's okay.
preferred.
I think everybody, as long as we can hear you, we're good.
I think first thing we need to do is just clear up. It's Leif.
Leif, did I say Leif? I'm sorry, my
Not
bad.
Leif, and I just do that right away because I don't want anybody to get the wrong idea. It's Leif, rhymes with safe, okay? All right.
Right. Well, Leif and I are going to be sharing a little bit about some outcomes from the most recent, as in like Friday, it concluded the legislative session, and we're still like even scrambling as we speak, trying to figure out exactly all of the outcomes and all the things that the legislature did. Even just prior to this meeting, Leif said, I found another little Easter egg hidden in one of the bills. And so we're still working our way through this all, but we're going to go through a few pieces of transportation legislation that the legislature passed, and then touch briefly on some appropriations as well. But to orient this conversation, I just wanted to share a little bit of high level. So one, as many of us are aware, the legislative session is a very brief 45 days for the legislature to pass all the bills that they're trying to. 582 bills passed, and a $30.8 billion budget was appropriated this year. One of the themes that us at WFRC are kind of viewing this legislative session in terms of transportation investment is building on previous investment. The legislature over the past roughly about the last 4 years have invested a staggering amount of new one-time and some ongoing funds into transportation for multimodal projects. And while maybe perhaps the state revenues didn't allow for that quite as much this year, or the priorities have somewhat shifted, we're now able to build on that previous investment that was made, and continue to work forward on making the best of those investments to accomplish Utah's Unified Transportation Plan, the Wasatch Choice Vision, et cetera. So with that, I think we'll just jump in and start touching on a few key pieces of legislation. So I'll start us out first with, and Leif and I will bounce back and forth a little bit between these, but SB 195 is the Transportation Omnibus Bill from Senator Wayne Harper, meaning there are a number of provisions in here that impact transportation programs. I'll hit a few that were notable to WFRC. One is that it requires greater connectivity planning in municipal general plans. This originally came as a provision that would require making connections over water conveyances or canals, but came to an agreement to really just enhance connectivity in planning at the municipal level. It also clarifies station area planning reporting, or SAP. A lot of our different communities are in that process now of creating and finalizing their station area plans. This just clarifies reporting after that plan has been adopted. And then the third one that I wanted to mention, and this partly became one of the more controversial pieces of this bill during the legislative session in some of the later substitutes, and it was that it would prohibit Salt Lake City specifically from proceeding on certain roadway projects within the city, kind of blanketly. And where we ended up in coming to an agreement with Salt Lake City, with the legislature, and then with our partners at UDOT, was ultimately to have those highway. So sorry, this one is a little bit tricky to explain. I'll try and be brief here, but unless these certain projects were approved in a mobility plan that was developed by Salt Lake City and then approved by UDOT, the city can't move forward with building those projects. The legislature focused on, quote, highway reduction strategies, meaning roadway narrowing or removing a lane, and the ultimate place where we ended up is where Salt Lake City and UDOT will now collaborate in identifying any of these roadway projects, and will ultimately get approval. So I think it ended up in a could have been a worse place. I think UDOT might have some opinions on it as well, but ultimately, I think at WFRC we want to make sure that not just Salt Lake City, but our other communities are able to plan and construct their transportation projects as they would like to, in a way that promotes multimodal transportation. And so we hope that as UDOT and Salt Lake City continue that coordination, that the city will be able to do that. So Leif, do you want to hit the rest of this?
Yeah, just maybe on the plan stuff. It's not something that UDOT asked for, but we will with Salt Lake City work through that new mandate the best we can, and we look forward to working with our partners on that. So the bill also, as most everybody knows, UTA and UDOT are working collaboratively on some transit capital development. And one of the questions that came up was, who owns the stuff when it's purchased or built? And so we went through I thought a pretty good process where we clarified that in statute, clarified that ownership. And I think at the end of the day, we were given some flexibility to be able to figure out who is best suited to own that. And I think we're happy where that turned out. And hats off, of course, to the sponsor of this bill, Senator Harper, and then Representative Kay Christopherson was the House sponsor. They were very collaborative on this bill, I think, including with the items that Miranda already went over. There's also a increase in the TIF. That's the Transportation Investment Fund, the fund where we build highway capacity projects out of. There was a change in the earmark from 20.68% of state sales taxes to 27.68%. And that was offset by a reduction in 300 million, or I think it's 330. We put 300 million there. I think it's $330 million ongoing appropriation. So they took away the ongoing appropriation, but increased this percentage. And it's supposed to be revenue neutral for this year or thereabouts. But going forward, of course, a ongoing general fund appropriation doesn't grow, but this will. So into the future, just additional funding for highway capacity projects. The bill also, and I think this UTA, UDOT thought this was a good thing. It pushes back the start date of a new program that Representative Perucci sponsored last year, called the Transit Innovation Grant Program. And so that was a kind of a program that came out of Representative Perucci. She's in a growing district, and of course they want more and more and more of the product, which is a good thing, right? They want more of what we offer, and specifically UTA with transit services. And she was trying to look for ways to be able to get more in a maybe pilot program type of thing that might prove the need for that in an area. It's done in a way that kind of just makes UTA's revenue sources a little bit up in the air. And so this is probably a nice thing to be able to take another year and look at that and maybe potentially find some additional solutions to that issue. And so that program has been delayed. Then there's also requires UDOT and UTA to jointly study human service transportation coordination. So we'll do a study together and look at that human transportation. There's a variety of folks that provide human service transportation in the UTA service district. And this, I think there's some desire to consolidate that to have more of a one-stop shop rather than services just spread all over the place and folks have a hard time finding them and knowing what's available and so forth. And so we'll do a study and jointly with UTA and then have some recommendations in 2026 is when that's due. Also reinstates UDOT litter mitigation funding. We're excited about this. This is $1.8 million that we refer to as the COVID cut. All state agencies had to go through and cut some things during that time period in 2021, 2022. And that's what we offered up, and we have had that restored, which is a good thing. We'll have more resources to put into the litter cleanup. Also allows TIF funds to be used for corridor preservation. So corridor preservation, of course, is preserving a corridor that has a future use for a highway project, and we'll see in a later bill a transit project. So that can be really important, and possibly save a lot of money, because purchasing it now and building later, of course, real estate tends to go up in value, and especially if homes are built on that property, corridor preservation can save a lot of heartache of eminent domain and that sort of thing as well. So also funds specific local projects, Utah County, and then one down in Kane County, and then finally, it also clarifies who's responsible to maintain street lighting systems. This is something that goes along with an appropriation that UDOT received to be able to have more lighting technicians to work on lighting, make sure our street lights are on. UDOT, it says in the bill, will take care of the lighting systems on the interstate, and then also at intersections, and we're talking lighting at intersections where there's a state highway. Unless, of course, the lighting is kind of a decorative lighting, something maybe the city asked UTA to install as part of a project. So if it's something, above and beyond, then, the city will have to take care of that if it's at an intersection. So a nice clarification there as we try to do a little bit more with regards to lighting, and then, we get hopefully the safety benefits that comes with that.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Leif. And I know we're running a little short on time, so we'll try and jam through these relatively quickly. We also have, we as in WFRC, UTA, there's a few bill summaries for some of these, really comprehensive bills. And so I'll drop those in the chat, and you can also find those linked to the WFRC Government Affairs webpage if you're interested. So this one, HB 502, Transportation Infrastructure Funding Amendments by Representative Tusher. House sponsor is Senator Cullimore. This bill makes a few fairly significant changes. One of them is to the fifth local option sales tax. And we could spend a lot of time talking about how the fifth funds are distributed between cities, counties, and transit based on location, what county you're in. And I won't get into too many details, but the major change here is that it changes how the transit funds in the fifth will be distributed, whether that's in Salt Lake County to the County of the First Class Highway Projects Fund, or to the Transportation Investment Fund, or to UTA, based on who has imposed the fifth. So specifically, there's a provision in the bill that says if Davis and Weber counties impose the fifth, it changes the timing on how and when those funds are distributed. So I'll leave that there. It also funds specific local transportation projects out of some funds. So the first being the County of the First Class Infrastructure Bank. This is funded by a portion of the fifth local option sales tax revenues in Salt Lake County, and is estimated total about $100 million. So there's projects going to Draper, Harriman, West Jordan, Riverton, Bluffdale. There's a number of local projects there. There's also a specific project funded out of the Transportation Investment Fund, and then a number of projects funded out of the County of the First Class Highway Projects Fund, again, for projects specifically in Salt Lake County, funded through a portion of the second and third quarter local option sales taxes. It also funds a public transit hub, including ingress and egress in Big Cottonwood Canyon from funds in the Cottonwood Canyon Transportation Investment Fund. And then I'm going to have Leif talk briefly about the new Affordable Housing Infrastructure Grant Program that was funded in this bill.
So the bill authorizes for a $70 million bond that could be used for infrastructure necessary for housing projects. And of course, the hope is affordable housing projects. And, when you think of the infrastructure needed, it could be water, could be roads, could be sewer. It seems to be kind of tilted towards transportation type projects. And we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, so it authorizes the 70 million and then it creates a board to approve those grants. And lucky for UDOT, GOEO, and then Steve Waldrop, who's the kind of the state housing czar, special advisor to the governor. And so those three entities will make up that board. It also funds a public transit hub, near the big Cottonwood Canyon area, and it uses a current funding source called the CCTIF. That's the Cottonwood Canyon Transportation Investment Fund, or Infrastructure Fund. And so what it says is the growth in that fund above and beyond the 2025 base amount will go to this funding this project, and that's I believe part of the phase one of that project, which is of course on hold because of the lawsuit. So let's see, where are we going next?
I'm sorry, did you say that was for the transportation hub at the base of Big Cottonwood or base of Little Cottonwood Canyon?
It says Big Cottonwood area.
So going up to Brighton and Solitude then, not?
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah, and UDOT wasn't involved in drafting those portions. So I'm just assuming it's related to the Little Cottonwood Canyon EIS, but I could be wrong about that. So, yeah. All right. Any other questions or comments?
I have a comment.
Oh, yeah.
You talked about streetlights. I have found that if the streetlights aren't working, people are delighted. That's all.
Thanks, Mayor.
Hey, Miranda and Leif, we have a comment. This is Dawn Ramsey. We have a comment in the chat. One of the commissioners, Commissioner Blocker, is asking for a little bit of an explanation about what the fifth is. Could somebody really quickly touch on that for her?
Sure. Yeah, I'll touch on that briefly. And Mayor, I'd love to have a more conversation about this offline as well. The commissioner, by the way, is a new member of JPAC from the WFRC area, her as well as council member Ross Romero from Salt Lake County. So appreciate having you guys join us. But yeah, so the fifth is a local option sales tax. So an optional sales tax that is county imposed. There are, I believe, five different local option sales tax for transportation impositions. We often call them the quarters, the second quarter, third quarter. The fifth is, I guess you would call it the fifth quarter. That is a 0.20% local option sales tax imposed, where a portion of those funds are directed in different ways based on the county you're in and the availability and whether or not there's transit in your county. So, for example, in Salt Lake County, a portion of that local option sales tax goes to cities to be distributed, a portion goes to the county to be used, and then a portion goes to for transit-related purposes. So, I would argue that the local option sales taxes, the quarters, are probably one of the more convoluted and confusing pieces of transportation funding in the state. But I think I have some agreement from those of us in the room. Thank you. But yeah, Commissioner, I'd love to talk with you more about that later as we have time.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and jump in here on the next one, SB 174, Transportation Governance. And my first bullet point here, this is very simple. UTA may feel like, well, this was a lot more painful and hard to go through, but it just clarifies governance roles of UTA, Executive Director, Board of Trustees, and Local Advisor Council. And on this one, again, just hats off to the sponsor. I feel like it was a great process and we were able to kind of go through and discuss things, and UTA's nodding their heads like, yeah, go ahead, Beth.
I just wanted to comment on that. This is Beth Holbrook. We had an opportunity to work with a sponsor on this, and I think I'll just kind of talk about this. In the original iteration of this, there was not quite, there was different understandings of how a three-member full-time board would operate. And this just clarifies all of that. It's actually putting into definition what we have been doing in practice. So, but we think that this is a really good piece to add to this as we move forward on this full-time governance. So that's all I want to add.
That's great feedback. Thank you. And then the last piece of that is it just clarifies some things on UDOT's role in helping with UTA capital development projects, and gets us involved a little bit more because it includes projects that don't have state funding, but also allows UDOT to delegate responsibility of projects to UTA if UTA is in a better position to deal with those projects. And so we really appreciate that flexibility and also appreciate the partnership that we've now developed with UTA.
And to that point, it does solidify the partnership. It's a win-win. So.
Leif, before you continue, Jay Fox has his hand raised. Jay, if you have a comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. So on that second point, and it really reiterates something that Leif said previously, that those provisions on oversight and supervision, came out of working with the senator as he was preparing to publish the bill, and really appreciate that work. It's hard to imagine any fixed guideway capital development projects, which are the largest transit projects, that wouldn't have state funding in it. So I'm not sure how much it expanded that oversight, and it certainly doesn't, will continue to have strong partnership with UDOT. I will again just highlight that second part. I think is really important. It gives us, it was something that didn't exist before SB 174, giving the ability of UDOT to delegate responsibility of projects. Really helps us as we work through, what does UDOT want to take on as responsibility? What would they want UTA to handle? And we've already actually kind of living that with the Mid Valley Express project. But thanks to Senator Harper, thank you, Leif, for your entire team for working with us on this bill.
All right, so we'll just go to the next bill. Thanks, Jay, for weighing in on that. Jay was a big part of those negotiations, and I think things turned out really well. So we talked about advanced air mobility quite a bit. This bill, the two big things is it funds a community outreach and public education campaign, and then also a advanced air mobility toolkit for political subdivisions. It doesn't require political subdivisions to adopt anything, but has us provide a toolkit online so that political subdivisions have a resource that they can go to for best practices and the like.
All right, I'll quickly touch on this one.
Hey, quick question. What's the timeline on that toolkit? When do you think that'll be available for political subdivisions?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm thinking that in the bill, it says that we have to have it by July 1, 2026. So we do have some time. We could surprise everybody and get something out before that, and maybe could, start. So it requires us to publish it on our website. There's possibility we could have it on some things on the website, and we continue to build that through 2026. But yeah, that's the date in the bill. So
I've already got a scope of work. So we'll as soon as funding.
So we just had Paul Dameron, who earlier presented on advanced air mobility, said he's already got a scope of work going, and we're just waiting for funding, which kicks in on July 1 of this year. They're giving us, I think it's $150,000 to work on that toolkit. So,
and we're looking forward to that toolkit because air mobility is just over my head.
Another zinger by the mayor. All right, SB 290 bicycle lane safety amendments by Representative Maga ultimately defines bike lane as designated for exclusive use of bicycle use on roadways adds a moving violation for driving within or obstructing a bike lane, but for certain circumstances. And we see these two provisions as kind of no-brainers, but ultimately we think that it will help promote improved biking safety and lead to greater adoption of bicycling and active transportation as a transportation choice, because roadway users, bicycle users will feel safer and more comfortable in bike lanes, knowing that it's supposed to be designated for bike use only.
And I might add on that one, this is actually serious.
Okay.
Sometimes,
Thanks, Mayor.
sometimes during congestion traffic, drivers feel like they can use that bike lane to drive on, and because bikes are going faster than them at that point.
And I think this would clarify that
That
they
they cannot.
can't.
That's correct, and we appreciate that.
So just two more bills and then we have one slide on funding, okay? Just about there. HB 471 by a new representative, Cal Roberts, I believe from the Draper area. He ran this for us as we've talked a number of times just in this meeting. UTA and UDOT were jointly working on these transit capital development projects. And this gives UDOT an additional tool if it's needed at some point. This would allow us to piggyback on another state's or some transit agency across the country or even in Utah to piggyback on their procurement contract to purchase transit vehicles. And of course, they'd have to agree to us using that contract, but just gives us another tool to purchase transit vehicles. So, is this one mine?
This is you.
Oh, okay. So this is last one, bill wise. Corridor preservation amendments, SB 220, actually HB 229, Representative Christopherson. And this clarifies that corridor preservation funds can be used for transit corridors. We were given some money a year or two ago and then there was some intent language, which is a little bit different than law, that said, hey, make sure and use some of this or prioritize some of this funding to preserve the corridor for Front Runner from Provo to Payson. And then when we went to do that, our attorneys were like, whoa, we don't have the authority to do that. And so we asked for this clarification to allow us to do that. And then I'll just highlight one budget item here as well. For corridor preservation overall, Representative Christopherson did a request and received it, a $20 million ongoing appropriation from the TIF over to corridor preservation. So.
Perfect. Thanks, Leif. We'll hit quickly on appropriations. Most have already been discussed somewhat. We talked about a number of local transportation projects that were funded. There was roughly more than $100 million in local projects funded out of those specific county project fund sources. There was as Leif just mentioned, $20 million for corridor preservation into the MARTA Del Rey Corridor Preservation Fund, that $70 million housing grant program bond from UDOT. And then notably, there was notably because it's large in dollar value, was $300 million for Third West in Salt Lake City partly to accommodate the downtown redevelopment that's aligned with the convention center and that district downtown. So wanted to highlight those. Other than that, it was a pretty quiet year for transportation appropriations this legislative session. So with that, I think Leif and I are happy to answer any questions, or we're happy to move to our next item.
We're running short on time, but if you do have questions, you can ask them. Otherwise, thank you for your time, and we'll move on to the next agenda item. Tim Baird, a statewide regional roadway grid network study, if you don't mind. And yeah, if you could be brief, we'd appreciate it.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for the invitation to give a quick update on the statewide MPO's roadway network grid study. There we go. I'm Tim Baird. I'm the consultant project manager for this effort. Next slide, please. So this study was funded by the legislature, I believe 2 sessions ago. We got up and running last summer. And the main goals of this study are to assess connectivity and the functionality of our roadway grids across all 4 of the state's MPO areas. We want to understand how those networks are working, where there are issues now and into the future. We've been working through that over the fall, have done a lot of analysis and built a strong backbone of data for understanding those connections. We're now on to developing potential projects and solutions that can enhance the functionality of those grids now and into the future. And we'll be moving soon into testing and evaluating and refining those. And lastly, we are going at the closing stages of the project, be working to prepare each MPO and partner agencies to move forward on implementing these both through your RTPs as well as other corridor studies and things of that nature, corridor preservation and so forth. Next slide. We have gone through some extensive evaluation of each MPO's networks using a number of model-based metrics that touch on accessibility, the efficiency of our networks, how resilient they are to disruptions and breakdowns, and fair access, especially looking at lower income parts of each MPO. Next slide. Now we're transitioning towards developing these solutions and just getting a very broad range of potential projects and improvements that could improve connectivity and allow each MPO's network to be more functional. We've gone through a brainstorming process internally and in collaboration with each of the regions, and are now kind of moving through the funnel here of initial review, refinement, and then we'll be getting into analyzing it, prioritizing, ultimately getting to a project list that's ready for consideration in the RTP process. Next slide. Big thank you to members of staff on each MPO, as well as UDOT region staff, counties, transit providers, and everybody who contributed to the workshops that happened at the beginning of this year, including several folks in the room here. We had a great time just brainstorming a number of solutions, looking at the data, and really getting at areas to focus on and potential new connections. Based on that, next slide, we have been going through formalizing that input and developing early sets of aspirational solution lists. We recognize that not every line on these maps is going to be feasible or worthwhile, but we're taking a very broad brush look to understand where there's opportunities for new projects to really enhance how we get around each of these MPO regions. Based on that material, our next steps are MPO staff level review and then a broader review with localities through each MPO's technical advisory committee. Based on that feedback, we'll be refining those solutions, packaging them into scenarios for evaluation, and ultimately getting to a prioritized list of solutions. Next slide. So a few other ongoing efforts related to that are going to be just adding more details into each of those projects, understanding what would be entailed in those and order of magnitude costs, establishing clear prioritization criteria that are aligned with the goals and objectives for each of our different MPOs. And also presenting just some research on how other states approach jurisdictional ownership and transfers of ownership, just providing some context on different strategies and approaches there. Ultimately, we'll be providing a web map that showcases and houses key deliverables and resources that come out of here and facilitates that stakeholder review as well as our ultimate deliverables. So with that, happy to take any fast questions. Otherwise, I'll pass the torch to our last agenda items. Thanks so much.
Thank you. There's no questions. Moving on to our next agenda item, shared transportation reauthorization principles. Miranda, you're up again.
Yes, thank you. Let's see. Kimberly, would you let me share? Okay, that's great. If you're willing to share it, perfect. So I first want to orient everyone. We're going to be looking at this document. There were some included in the agendas by the door in case you weren't able to pick one up on your way in. So this first one, Federal Transportation Reauthorization, Utah Principles. So I first want to orient us to this particular item. We are facing the upcoming reauthorization of the Surface Transportation Act, which is the federal act that funds our programs and provides the funding that come to Utah's transportation partners, UDOT, the MPOs, our transit partners. And it's set to expire in 2025 and then be reauthorized. And so Congress is now tasked with and in the process of starting that reauthorization. Utah coincidentally has a great number of our congressional delegation in influential roles to impact the next transportation reauthorization, with Senator Curtis and Representative Kennedy and Representative Burgess Owens sitting on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee and the Senate EPW and Commerce Committee, the committees that will oversee this reauthorization. And why this is important is because we really have the opportunity to weigh in with these congressional partners of ours and help influence exactly how the reauthorization will look like, and to ensure that we in Utah can receive the funding and the stability that we need to do the important work that we do here in the state. And so quickly, I was going to turn to Ryan Levitt online to share a little bit about what's happening in DC right now, just a few quick minutes. And then I want to turn back to this document and start running through some of the principles and background that we have in here to kind of get support from the group on the direction that we're moving in here. So Ryan, I don't know if you're on and willing to share a few minutes.
Yes, I have really three main points to share. Obviously, a lot of uncertainty happening in Washington, D.C. right now. There's a funding deadline tomorrow night to keep the federal government open. There's a lot of back and forth about whether or not the federal government's going to shut down, at least for a period of time. The House proposed a full year CR, which basically takes fiscal year 24 appropriation levels, pulls them all the way through the end of the fiscal year 25, which ends at the end of September. So it's basically a funding mechanism that will fund the remainder of the 7 months of the current fiscal year. It's a what's called a clean CR. So if your communities had earmarks on the fiscal year 25 bill, those are not going to make it across the finish line this year. There will be no earmarks. There will be no increases in funding levels. They will not be fiscal year 25 levels. They'll be still the fiscal year 24 levels. So it's not an ideal mechanism to fund the government at all. And but both sides negotiated like crazy to try to get a spending bill done for fiscal year 25 and came up short. And so this sort of looks like the only vehicle that will resolve without getting a shutdown at this point. It's not clear whether that will pass or not, so everyone stay tuned. In terms of, I know a lot of communities are worried about some of the executive orders that are coming out of DC related to freezing funding on grant programs. I know many of you probably have federal grant awards that may be pending, or you're being dispersed federal funds. Those issues are starting to get resolved now, but for the last several weeks, there's been some concern about whether or not federal grants are going to be dispersed. What we're hearing from Department of Transportation is any grants really focused on electric vehicle charging and electric vehicle issues are going to likely be done away with. And so as are anything sort of related to climate and anything sort of in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. So if you have grants in those areas, there's some reason to be concerned. They also interpret things primarily related to bicycle infrastructure. So if you have shared use paths or grants related to trail systems, those issues also may kind of cause some problems. So it's worth working with the federal agencies to figure out where your grants are. Lastly, before I turn it back over to you, Miranda, as they're just trying to resolve fiscal year 25, our congressional delegation's preparing to open up their portals for fiscal year 26 funding requests. There's really two kinds of federal funding requests. Three, if you talk about grants, but when you talk about appropriations from Congress, there's what's called the programmatic request. These are sort of if you want to weigh in with the offices in support of certain programs, maybe it's grant programs that your community relies on, or there are also earmarks, which have been called community project funding requests. So if your community is preparing to make these kinds of requests, you'll want to reach out to the congressional offices to get their forms and their deadlines. The programmatic type requests are already out for most of the offices, but they have not released their earmark requests just yet. But this is the time of year. So if you're preparing to do federal funding requests, make sure that you're staying engaged. And I'm also happy to be a resource to you and answer questions if you have any on that process. And happy to answer any questions you have, but I know we're running low on time, so I'm going to hand it back over to you, Miranda.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. And Ryan is obviously talking about the more near-term, budget negotiations that we're hearing about in Congress and some of those things. Whereas this reauthorization that we're going to talk about now is more long-term. Like I said, 2026, September 2026 is when the current authorization is complete, and so. I want to just turn folks to the Federal Transportation Reauthorization document. And I just want to note that this is not coming just from WFRC. This was put together with Utah's transportation partners to identify, and you'll see on this first page, authorization background. So giving a little bit of context, and I'll just kind of walk through that quickly, giving a little bit of context on the reauthorization and Utah's considerations going into this. One being Utah is one of the fastest growing states in the nation, with seeing rapid population growth. Utah's collaborative approach increases efficiency and effectiveness by prioritizing the most impactful policies and investments, making Utah a prudent steward of federal dollars. 3, federal funds are an essential component of transportation funding in Utah. And 4, investing in transportation infrastructure is a national priority and a core federal role. So again, this is how we're kind of viewing this reauthorization. And so if you move to the next page, these were specific principles identified by the transportation partners, looking at long-term and timely reauthorization, meaning, Congress doesn't kick the can down the road for reauthorizing these programs, as we've already seen with a continuing resolution on this budget year. Authorize robust investment levels, right? Making sure that the programs that serve us have the funding that is needed to do the work that we do. Enhance formula funding, the funding that comes directly to us, and evaluate discretionary programs. Ryan talked about some of these grants. There's a lot of them that likely won't continue moving on into this next reauthorization based on the administration's priorities. So looking at the various amount of grant programs out there, what's important, what's critical, especially for Utah to keep. For a sustainable funding mechanism, this is for transportation funding generally. And then lastly, streamline processes, making sure that our federal review and approval processes are streamlined to reduce time and eliminate unnecessary duplication and cost. I think it might be out of order in your packet, but there is a blank page on here that says Federal Transportation Reauthorization, Utah Policy Priorities. And this is blank right now. And the reason why is because, and why we're bringing it to this group is for the transportation partners to identify what the core programmatic policy priorities are for Utah collectively. That could be the capital investment grant program, which Utah is currently working through that process to get a significant amount of funding for the double tracking of Front Runner project, right? Making, if we were to put that as a core Utah policy priority to ensure that that program continues and that we'll be able to benefit from that program. So the idea here is to have the partners identify what needs are most important to them and have us, you know, ultimately come together and support and promote these. And the idea here is that this document is something that can be given and socialized with our congressional delegation, particularly of those in that leadership position to influence the transportation authorization, and all of them generally. But I know we're so short on time here, and it's unfortunate that we don't have more time. I do want to give Carlos, I know you're not at the table specifically, but Carlos, he's over there. He does play a significant role with AASHTO, and you know AASHTO is taking the lead in the next transportation reauthorization. Trustee Holbrook, you also serve on APTA. Sorry, too many acronyms here, and they're not mine. So I'll let you guys share if you want to what those are. But if you have any perspective that you want to share very briefly, moving into this, I don't know if you have any thoughts, Trustee or Carlos, if you want to come to the table, you're welcome to.
I'll just say something really quick. Thanks, Miranda. I appreciate that background. And Ryan has been, he helps UTA as well in the lobbying world, and it's been incredibly helpful. I am the legislative chair for APTA, that's the American Public Transportation Association. And we actually just were back in Washington, D.C. last week, meeting with congressional leaders throughout the country, specifically talking about keeping the investment strategies for transportation in at least relatively good condition. And basically that discussion was with the chair. So we met with Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith, who is from Mississippi, and she is the chair of THUD. And these are the discussions really are basically talking about the business modeling utilization for why there's value to increasing or, well, keeping steady investments in transportation and transit. That's pretty much where we're at. I think Ryan articulated it very well. It's a very unique atmosphere back in DC right now. So that's about it. But if there's any other questions, happy to be connected offline.
Okay, thank you, Trustee. Carlos is still seated, so I'll take a pass from that. Yeah, thank you, Carlos. But I think ultimately, and I'll wrap here, and you know, happy to welcome any discussion on these specific principles if anyone wants to weigh in. But I think the hope here is that the transportation partners can bring these forward, come to an agreement on these principles and priorities, and get them to our not only to our congressional delegation, but prior to that, get support from our other industry partners. We did that with our last transportation reauthorization principles, where our partners at the Utah League of Cities and Towns or the Association of General Contractors also shared their support of these approaches. We hope to do that again. And I think, you know, we're working towards finalizing those priorities. And this is a very quick process as Congress is starting to work on this now. And so now is the time to engage. Now is the time to be involved. And so we'll work on this quick accelerated timeline to make sure that we're working with a unified voice for Utah's transportation needs to make sure that that this next authorization is favorable to Utah. So.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? All right, noticing the time, item number 5 is just a call for agenda items for the next meeting. If you have any, you're welcome to let us know. Otherwise, please feel free to reach out to Kim or Lenise or myself, and we'll make sure we get those on there. Is there anything on the top of anybody's mind that they'd like to mention? Seeing none, other business. Is there any other business that needs to take place before us today?
This is Gil with Washington County, and Commissioner Stevenson said I couldn't say much, so I'll make it brief. I just over bill ordinances, and I know the legislature would like to maintain more control, or not maintain, but have more control. We just really would like to not let that go anywhere. And if I'm a lone wolf in this, I'll fight by myself. But we see more and more efforts on a state level to say, put a billboard wherever you want, you know. But I'm just there.
Thank you. Is there anything else? Seeing none, we'll just, again, thank you for coming to Provo. And again, thank you to Utah County for hosting us in this building. Our next meeting is June 5th. And with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Have a motion. Do I have a second? Sounds like we're out of here. Thank you again.